Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all of the organisers for organising this, and it's good to be here. It would be nicer to be in St. Petersburg, of course. But so what I'm going to talk about today is the systematicity in language that people have been looking at these last few years. So all of us are aware of words like sneeze and snore, where the words seem to mean almost the same thing to do with the nose, but they kind of sound a little the same because they both start with sn. So the systematicity I'm talking about is a much more widespread thing than this. It's much more kind of distributed across the lexicon, and it's much more in line with the topographic kind of processing that we know the brain does. So this is the first slide. So we're looking at words that sound the same and tend to mean the same. So on the left here, what you've got is a group of words. So in these studies, we use hundreds and hundreds of words from the lexicon. And what you see here is a small toy kind of version of that. So we've got the words dog and cat and sneeze. And what we're interested in is the distance in terms of the phonology from one word to all the rest of the words. So the distance here, dog to cat, we can work that out using Levenshtein distance, the number of different edits in terms of the features that you need to get to turn the phonology of a word like dog into cat. Excuse me. So crucially for this study, we were looking at the language of Korean. We were interested in that because Korean allows you to do a lot of interesting things, as we'll see. So moving over to the right side of the screen, what we've got here is the same network, as it were, between the meanings of those words. We can get the meanings from something like WordNet. We can get the distances, but what we prefer to do is to quantify that, to define the meanings in terms of the vectors that one gets from a large corpus of the language. So you're defining the meaning of dog in terms of the rest of the words that all occur around each token of dog. And so again, we can get the distance between dog and cat. And so what we do is to line up all of the distances. So this is the distance in terms of speech sounds here, and the corresponding distance here is just there. And so if it were the case that the language was completely compositional, if the language was completely transparent and we could just predict meaning, what we should find is isomorphism between the web, as it were, here on the left and the web on the right there. But of course, the language isn't a compositional thing, and the correlation we get between the distances is not the correlation that we get between the distances isn't one. The thing we find here, the result we get here for Korean is small but really significant. It's interesting comparing it with the rest of the languages that have been investigated in this way. Only a small number of them have used phonology to do this. Most of them have used the proxy of the actual orthography instead of the phonology, and all of the previous studies have been with the languages of Europe. So we were interested in a very different language, and the thing we find here is the systematicity there is really significant. So words that mean the same tend to the words that tend to sound the same tend to mean the same. And the level of correlation we get here is about twice that of the rest of the languages that have been looked at. Although one can't really compare across the languages like that because the samples are different. So the interesting new thing I want to stress here is that you can slice up the sample that we got here at the top. You can slice it up in lots of different ways, and each way you slice it up, you see that the systematicity is still there. It's a really kind of the systematicity is a really distributed thing. So we sliced up the sample in terms of the words that came from the Chinese influence there, and the words that were the pure ones there. We sliced it up in terms of things like onset, the nucleus, the coda, and the rhyme, and all of those things also show the same kind of systematicity with meaning. We slice it up in terms of the syntax with nouns and verbs, and smaller subsets as well, like onomatopoeia or the loan words. We also slice it up in terms of different frequency strata, and in all of these things, the systematicity is there, except in the really lowest of the frequency strata. So this is a new thing, that the systematicity we see is really a pervasive thing. We've also carried out this kind of approach, and this is a new thing. We've done this with looking at the actual orthography. So Korean is special in these terms in that the orthography, you see the letters here, the orthography was constructed very consciously something like 500 years ago to reflect things like the shape of the lips, the position of the tongue, the mouth, and things of that sort. So what we were doing is really applying the same kind of study to map the corresponding distances, but the distances here are the distances, the visual distances between the letters, which you can calculate using something called Hausdorff distance. It's a kind of crude first attempt to do that. And the distance between the canonical pronunciations for each of the letters that you see there. And what you find here, predictably, because the orthography was constructed to be like this, what you find is a surprisingly high degree of the systematicity between the canonical pronunciations and the letter shapes. It changes for different ones of the fonts there. This is the best one there. You also get this effect for things like shorthand, like Pitman's. We looked at the Roman alphabet, and it is there. It's very small. It is significant for certain fonts. So what's underlying this is this very pervasive long-tail distribution that you find just all over the world, and just all in language as well. Just to explain it, if you look at frequency of words, you have a very long tail of fairly low frequency words, and you just have a small number of words like the filled pause, the function words. You just have a very small proportion of words of really high frequency. So I think it's a diversion to ask, is this a Yule distribution, a geometric curve, an exponential, all those sorts of things. All you need really to know is the thing has a long tail, and these long tail distributions are just everywhere. If we look at what's going on with phonology, you see it's the same, that the more you go into the words like this, there are a really small number of words that are very short, that we kind of reduce lots, and that are the words that are just easier to say. As you go down the tail here, you get the weirder words, the harder to say words. These kinds of studies all concentrate purely on the monosyllabic words, but clearly off the end of the scale here, there are longer and longer and longer words. if you look at meaning, what's going on here, the infrequent words don't have a lot of opportunity to occur next to lots of other words. So the context vectors they have are really quite sparse. The more frequent the word is, the more the contexts differ, until you get to things like function words and the filled pause, the really frequent words, where they just occur in lots and lots of different kinds of contexts. And so this is a new kind of claim we want to make here. The more you go up here, the more you're kind of depending on the processing of pragmatics to really understand what's happening. This is the largest of the contexts that you can have. And what we want to say is that as opposed to that kind of involving lots and lots of work, if you're bringing the biggest context to bear, the pragmatics to bear, there's just less work there. So when we think of things in interactive activation terms, you would think, oh, there's lots and lots and lots of these connections here. That looks like lots of work. But if you think of it more in terms of the complexity of the system here, there are just lots and lots of these kind of criticalities that are just poised there just to spring into action. And so you get a lot of those are just really efficient things to use. And so what we really want to see to pragmatics, when you're talking about rare words, long words, these are just hard work. So just to conclude here, the systematicity we've been looking at is all through the language. It's very distributed. It's useful potentially for language learning in infancy. It's probably useful for processing because it's tapping into the kind of topographic processing that we know is just all over the brain. Long tail distributions seem to mediate the systematicity I'm talking about here. So we can ask what's really kind of in play here. Is there some kind of universal that captures, that's the most efficient, effective way of trying to investigate all of this? So the meaning of universal that we usually have in psycholinguistics is one we've taken from the linguists. It's a really abstract thing. The kind of universal we're using here is something explored by the philosopher Ival Ilyenkov, where a universal can be a material thing. And the material thing that we're stating underlies all of this. We go right back to Zipf, who said, it's just effort, it's the work done. Sometimes for trying to perceive language, we might think that just means the work you can see with the lips and things, but now there's been this kind of sea change to talking about the listener trying to actually predict things. And so it's not always work that you can see, but it's work that the listener is able to think will happen. So the work done is the thing that kind of explains all of this, I think. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you again for listening.
Thank you very much, Richard. Very rich and interesting presentation. I think we have some questions. I can see one from Maria Fleckman. Maria, please.
Yuri, I think something is wrong with the sound, because it seems like I hear that you are saying something, but it's very, very quiet.
Oh, hello, sorry, my microphone seems to have been off. Thank you very much, Richard. This is very interesting. I think we have some questions. Maria Flaxman has a question. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Richard, thanks a lot for your talk. I'm a researcher at the Friedrich Schiller University, Jena, doing a postdoc on diachronic iconicity. I was very much looking forward to your talk, as it makes me really happy to know that people research systematicity in language from various aspects. And I was just wondering if you study the diachronic side of the problem as well, because it turns out that iconic sound meaning mapping has different prominence and different strata of language. For example, you are probably very familiar with the Jespersen article on the correlation between E sounds and small size. And I have been looking at this problem from the historical point of view, and it turns out that this correlation is a very recent phenomenon in English language. For example, words like tiny, teeny, they acquired this E sound due to regular sound changes that had preceded these processes, and you don't find such words in Old English, for example. How do you regard this problem?
I think it's a really interesting issue. I sort of, for a long time, I've wanted to think in terms of what kind of etymological strata are there, the words we get from Old High German and things of that sort, and just whether it's present really in the processing that we do. I think it's really interesting. I think it's difficult to do that work because we're not entirely sure of the pronunciations the further you go back. We attempted a little bit to tackle it in Korean because what we were looking at there was the Chinese influence there. So you can kind of distinguish things a bit there. And what we found again was that it was the systematicity was really equally strong in the pure Korean part of the sample that we had, and the Chinese as well. There is certainly, I think, to change to the letters of the alphabet, I think there's a clearer diachronic picture there, because some of the sounds like the w and things like that kind of we have a clearer idea of where they kind of came into English, and the letters that were produced or kind of joined up to make them. So I think we can say that with regard, we can look at that diachronic issue with regard to the letters. As to the sounds, again, I think another limiting factor is it's harder to get large corpora when you go back in time like that. It's really the Bible you're looking at there.
Well, I agree to some extent. If you're looking at Old English, I have found about 300 imitative words, onomatopoeic words in the whole corpus.
It's really interesting to do that.
So it's limited indeed.
Be extremely interested certainly I'd be extremely interested to talk offline about this.
Okay, thank you.